My name is Captain Lauren Reed, 34 years old, U.S. Army Logistics Officer. At my sister's wedding, my father stood up and called me the family's janitor. The room laughed. Then the groom's father, a major general, rose, saluted me, and said 7 words that silenced the entire tent. What would you do if you saw that in real life? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe. I don't remember the first song the DJ played. I remember the smell. Barbecue smoke and vinegar cutting through the sweet perfume of lilies, all of it riding a wet Pennsylvania heat that clung like a damp uniform. The reception sat inside a steel mill relic outside Pittsburgh. Rust-red furnaces shouldering up behind a white tent strung with fairy lights. The beams overhead groaned every time the wind shifted, and the lights trembled like they were standing at attention. People called the place historic. To me, it felt like a staging area before an operation. Bright, loud, and already 2 steps from going wrong. "Lauren," someone sang out as I came through the entrance, and 3 cousins I barely knew took turns air-kissing my cheek as if I'd flown in on leave just to be decorative. I smiled. I have a practice smile for civilian rooms. Friendly, contained, neutral. It's the same one I use when a warehouse inspector wants a tour while my team is moving pallets on a clock. I found my table. Back corner, between the family's head cluster and the cousins who hover for gossip. Good placement if you need to observe. Bad if you need an ally. From that angle, I could see my father exactly the way he liked to be seen. Broad-shouldered at the bar. An Iron City bottle sweating in his hand, shoulders rolled open like a foreman's, telling a story with his palms. Frank Reed built houses. He used to say men like him held the roof of America on their backs, and men like me shuffled paper underneath it. He never noticed I didn't correct him about the pronoun. My sister Chloe moved through the tent in an orbit of lace and cameras. She looked happy. I wanted to let it be that simple. My mother, Brenda, hovered with pins and tissues, fixing what didn't need fixing. Every time she glanced in my direction, she smoothed her dress as if respect could be ironed into fabric. The first toast started. Stories about softball and scraped knees. And I let my eyes soften, unfocusing so the laughter rolled past. Logistics teaches you where to put your attention when noise spikes. Count the forks. Track the exits. Clock the choke points. I traced the grain of the oak table with my thumb and felt my heart settle into its operational pace. In through the nose for 4. Hold. Out through the mouth for 4. Tactical breathing isn't just for the field. It's for any room where someone wants to drag you back into a role you've already outgrown. "Captain Reed." A voice drawled near my shoulder, splitting my rank like firewood. One of my father's old job site friends. Calloused hands, clean shirt, eyes already shiny. "Still, filing requisitions?" He chuckled before I could answer, like the joke had done its job. I smiled the way you smile at a pothole you can't fix tonight. Across the tent, my father lifted his bottle to catch the DJ's attention. He doesn't need a microphone to command a room. Volume and confidence do the work. He worked his way to our table like a man crossing a job site to reassign a crew. He stood behind my cousin's chair, braced his hands on the back, and didn't look at me. "This one," he said, jerking his chin toward where I sat, voice pitched for audience, "is our family's glorified janitor. Cleans up messes the real folks make." The chuckles started the way they always start, in relief. Someone wants permission to laugh, and someone provides it. Aunt Jo's bracelets clinked as she covered her mouth too late, laughter already escaping. 2 uncles made that sympathetic face people use when they want to be kind without being brave. My mother's eyes slid to her lap. Chloe turned her shoulder like she'd heard a draft. It's stunning how loud silence can be when it's choreographed. I set my hands palm down on the table to feel the wood. The room tunneled in, noisy edges blurred, and the details sharpened where I placed them. A smear of sauce on a dessert plate, condensation bead racing a bottle label, the single fairy light above me that flickered offbeat, a miswired metronome. I counted 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. There's a temptation in moments like that to answer with an explosion. It feels like action. It looks like control. It's neither. Good logistics is restraint. You move what matters, when it matters, where it will matter most. My phone buzzed once against the table, a tight, respectful vibration. I didn't check it. Courtesy texts don't demand attention. They place it. I had sent mine 20 minutes earlier, a brief notification about my arrival to someone whose calendar runs in increments shorter than a song. Nothing dramatic. Just, Sir. Captain Reed. On site, NLT 1900. Congratulations to the family. Respectfully, you don't send that to draw a sword. You send it the way you mark a pallet received. Verified, logged, accountable. My father leaned in, enjoying his angle. Who even invited her? He asked nobody in particular, and the joke arrived like a pallet dropped from knee height. Just enough force to jolt, not enough to break. The laughter that followed had that sour undernote I know too well. The laughter of people relieved not to be the target. A cousin across from me attempted kindness. You know he's just teasing, she whispered, eyes darting for witnesses. I kept my gaze on the table. Sure, I said. It's amazing how many wars call themselves teasing until you clock the casualties. The DJ shifted to a brighter track. A line of lights flickered. Cutlery chimed. I let the noise fill and pass like weather. In my chest, the beat stayed steady. The worst thing a supply line can do under pressure is surge. That's when things spill. Parts get lost and people get hurt. You hold the pace. You make the next right move. Across the tent, someone stood. I didn't look up, not yet. The sound changed first. The way conversations break off when leadership enters a space. Forks paused midair. A chair leg scraped concrete with that dry, unmistakable note. The fairy light above me steadied, an odd coincidence I allowed myself to notice. I placed my fingertips on the table, more out of habit than need, and let the air move through me. My father's smile slipped a degree, as if he'd spotted a foreman approaching with a clipboard. What? He said, softer now. To no one. To everyone. The tent gathered itself at the edges, the way a unit pulls into formation without speaking. I still hadn't lifted my eyes. I didn't need to. Command had already arrived. I grew up in a house that ran on the same principles as a job site. Orders flowed one way, and the person giving them never said, please. My father believed in the gospel of calluses and concrete. If you came home clean, you hadn't worked hard enough. My mother believed in keeping him calm. Between the two of them, I learned that silence was safer than argument, and that approval was measured in how little attention you attracted. When I was 13, I built a model bridge for a state science competition. I'd mapped load distribution across the trusses and could explain the math behind it. My father stood in front of my display with a bottle of gas station coffee and said to my teacher, "She gets that from her mother, likes to organize things." The teacher tried to explain that I'd beaten 3 engineering clubs to win, but Dad had already moved on to the next table, where a kid had made a volcano that actually smoked. He clapped the kid on the shoulder and said, "Now that's something." That was the shape of every victory that mattered to me. Small, quiet, invisible. When my sister Chloe got her learner's permit, he spent an afternoon teaching her to parallel park. When I asked for help changing a tire, he told me to ask one of the boys. I learned early to tighten my own bolts, metaphorical and otherwise. The day I walked into an Army recruiter's office, I didn't tell him I wanted to prove anything. I just wanted a system that made sense. The gunnery sergeant behind the table didn't talk about glory or explosions. He said, "Ma'am, logistics keeps the fight alive. Without it, everyone goes hungry, blind, and out of ammo." I nodded. Finally, someone who spoke my language. 2 months later, I was running hills in Quantico, carrying more weight than I thought my body could manage, learning that the real discipline isn't strength. It's consistency. The screaming, the sweat, the endless repetition. It was all data, pressure testing for the human machine. You didn't yell back. You adjusted and kept moving. When I finally pinned on Captain, my father didn't come to the ceremony. He sent a text that said, "Don't let it go to your head." My mother followed with a photo of Chloe holding her newborn. "Your sister made us grandparents." The caption might as well have been, "This is the real promotion." Years later, sitting under those flickering fairy lights at her wedding, I recognized the same dynamic unfolding, just with better catering. Chloe glowed, my father bragged, and I existed on the periphery. Useful for setup, invisible for celebration. He had found his audience again, a crowd that spoke his dialect of beer and blunt pride. He leaned back, laughing, the veins in his forearms standing out like rebar, while I sat tracing the seam of my napkin to keep my hands still. What he never understood was that the Corps taught me the same lessons he claimed to live by, except we had rules for them. You don't raise your voice at someone you outrank without cause. You don't tear down your team in front of an audience. And you never mistake volume for authority. Out there, respect is protocol, not personality. The music changed, glasses clinked. The family network reactivated around him. People who needed to be near the heat. I watched, not with resentment, but with the detached focus I used on supply chain failures. Patterns repeat until pressure breaks them. The question isn't if, it's when. Across the table, my mother caught my eye and gave that tiny warning shake of her head. The same one she used when I was 12 and wanted to speak up at dinner, when Dad was in a mood. Don't escalate. Don't embarrass. Don't make work for me. I looked down, nodded once, and followed the order, because discipline isn't always obedience to a person. Sometimes it's obedience to who you promised yourself you'd be when the pressure hits. A toast started somewhere near the front. Someone tapped a microphone, feedback shrieking like a distant siren. I felt the vibration through the floorboards. It was strange how the body remembers combat physics even in peace. How the muscles read ambient tension like radar. The tent smelled like hot steel and sugar. My father's laughter cut through it, harsh and confident. I could already see the next line forming in his head, could practically hear the cadence of it before he spoke. The thing about growing up under command is that you learn to read weather patterns before anyone else notices the wind. That night, I knew the storm was coming long before it hit. The first glass shattered somewhere near the bar. Not from anger, just a careless hand, a drunk uncle. But the sound sliced through the tent like a starter's pistol. And something in the air shifted. It was time. The DJ lowered the volume as my father rose, a little unsteady, one arm draped around a friend's shoulder for balance. He tapped his knife against his glass until the chatter stilled. His grin was wide, confident, the same grin he wore in every family photo. Chin tilted high, chest out, certain the room was his. All right, he said, voice carrying without need for a mic. I got 2 beautiful daughters. One just got married. He turned to Chloe, who glowed under the spotlight, her face tightening into polite expectancy. And the other? He paused, eyes sliding toward me. Well, the other keeps America's floors nice and clean. Laughter burst from the tables like a spark catching dry brush. A few people clapped. One man coughed, uncomfortable. Someone whispered, "He's just joking." I didn't move. My training kicked in like muscle memory. Breathing even, expression blank. In the field, stillness is control. You give chaos no feedback to work with. He leaned closer to his friend, loud enough for everyone. I mean, logistics officer? He chuckled. Sounds like a fancy way of saying janitor, right? The crowd laughed again, relieved to be told how to react. My mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Chloe looked at her husband, her eyes begging him to change the subject. He didn't. Nobody did. My father kept going, the rhythm of command too familiar to stop. You know what she told me last Christmas? Said she runs supply operations for joint task deployments. I said, Kid, I run supply chains too. Home Depot and a pickup truck. The laughter grew louder. I stared at my plate. The fork in my hand gleamed against the overhead lights, steady as a compass needle. I'd spent half my life teaching young officers that the key to leadership was composure. Now I was my own student. A single muscle in my jaw flexed. I thought about the endless nights in Quantico, about the desert heat that burns through gear and skin alike, about the men and women who trusted my calculations to keep them alive when fuel lines ran dry and ammo shipments went missing. None of that mattered here. Not to Frank Reed. I let the noise blur until it was just vibration. Then I heard the click of a camera, someone filming on their phone. The humiliation wasn't just local, it was being archived. I caught my reflection in the knife blade and almost didn't recognize the calm woman staring back. That wasn't submission. That was containment. My phone buzzed once in my lap. A single vibration, short and coded. Message received. I looked up. Across the tent, near the head table, a man in a dark suit with military posture had stopped mid-conversation. Even without the ribbons, you could see it. The measured stance, the squared shoulders, the stillness that comes from years of command. The groom's father, Major General Peterson. He was talking to another guest, but his eyes had already found me. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just observed, silent, assessing. My father, oblivious, kept going. "Don't get me wrong," he said. "She's tough, I'll give her that. But she's not one of those combat types, more like a clipboard corporal." The laughter this time came slower, awkward, fragments of loyalty mixed with doubt. You could feel the crowd start to sense the shift without understanding why. The general's presence radiated like a new order quietly being written. Then my father raised his glass. "To my daughter, the janitor who made good." It was the final straw. Not because of the words, because of the echo. Because every person who'd ever dismissed the quiet ones had just been given permission to laugh out loud. The sound rose and then faltered, tapering off as awareness spread through the tent like a cold front. People turned. One by one, conversations died. The light hit the general's metals as he stood. The laughter stopped altogether. He moved slowly, deliberately, straightening to full height. His wife touched his arm as if to ask what he was doing. He didn't answer. Every instinct in the room shifted from casual to formal without knowing why. From where I sat, I could see my father's confusion build. "What's going on?" he asked, still half smiling. The general adjusted his jacket, his gaze locked directly on me. Then, in front of everyone, family, guests, strangers, he raised his right hand to the brim of his cap and executed a perfect regulation salute. Gasps rippled across the tent. He held it. Steady, precise, the way you'd salute a senior officer stepping onto parade ground. My father's smile broke. His face drained of color. And then, in a calm, level voice that carried to the furthest table, the general said, "Sir, with all due respect, she outranks every last one of us here." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fairy lights seemed to stop flickering. I felt my pulse slow to a crawl. Not triumph, not revenge, just equilibrium. The kind that only comes when the truth finally speaks in the same language as power. No one moved. No one dared to. In that moment, my father's world, his hierarchy, his certainty, his imagined chain of command, folded in on itself. And I didn't have to say a single word. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was quieter, like a collective exhale after a long, unspoken lie had finally been corrected. Glasses stopped clinking. Forks hovered midair. Even the hum of the air conditioning felt suspended. General Peterson's salute stayed locked, arms straight, fingers aligned to regulation perfection. The old habits of every veteran in the room flared awake. A few stood without realizing why, spines straightening as if some ancient discipline had been summoned back into the air. I rose slowly. Not because of protocol, but because respect deserves acknowledgement. My own hand lifted in return, mirror precise, the movement automatic. For a second, the noise of the world disappeared. It was just the two of us, the general and me, connected by the invisible thread of shared service. When I dropped my hand, he spoke. "Captain Reed," he said evenly, "I received your text. Thank you for the courtesy. I didn't realize your family didn't." The words were calm, almost conversational, but they landed like a gavel. Every person who had laughed suddenly understood there had been a briefing before the battle. My father's mouth worked soundlessly. "Wait," he said, his voice breaking around the edges. You know her?" General Peterson turned to him with that measured authority that comes from decades of command. "I do. Captain Reed serves with distinction. I've read her reports. Your daughter's unit kept 2 battalions moving during the Okinawa supply freeze last year. Without her, the mission would have failed." The man's tone didn't rise, didn't need to. It carried the weight of documented fact, the kind of proof no argument can dent. All around, guests exchanged bewildered looks. Someone whispered, "She's in the army?" Another hissed back, "She's an officer." The general stepped closer, his boots solid against the tent's plywood floor. "Respect," he continued, "isn't a decoration you hand out when it suits you. It's issued with every oath, same as the uniform. Some of us never forget that." Then he faced me again, a faint nod. "Carry on, Captain." He returned to his table. Conversation didn't resume. The tent just breathed. My father swayed. The hand that had gripped his glass loosened. He stared at me as if trying to translate a language he didn't speak. "Captain?" he muttered, half to himself. "Captain?" I didn't move toward him. There's a point in every operation when you stop chasing outcomes and let the plan execute itself. This was that moment. My mother pressed a trembling hand to his arm. "Frank," she whispered, "sit down." But he couldn't. His pride, his engine, had stalled mid-revolution. The man who once filled every room suddenly seemed smaller, edges collapsing inward. The same people who had laughed with him minutes ago now studied their napkins, their phones, their shoes. Anywhere but at him. The DJ's playlist sputtered back to life, an ill-timed pop song about love and forever. It filled the vacuum like smoke after a blast. I sat, steady, posture perfect. My glass of water trembled only slightly as I lifted it. Across the tent, the general's wife gave me a small, discreet smile, the kind only another military spouse or veteran's family can give. She understood the language of restraint. I didn't feel victorious. Victory implies someone lost, and this wasn't about defeat. It was about correction, a balance restored. My phone vibrated once more. A new message, proud to have witnessed that. MGP, I allowed myself the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of recognition. The chatter slowly returned in fragments, awkward, fragmented sentences about weather, food, anything that wasn't what had just happened. The sound of denial rebuilding itself. But the atmosphere had changed. When I finally stood to leave the table, no one stopped me. People shifted to make space. Not out of courtesy, but something quieter. Deference. Outside the tent, the night air hit like cool water. The furnaces towered above, their rusted skeletons glowing under string lights. I looked up at the steel and thought about structure. The way stress either breaks a beam or tempers it. Behind me, the tent erupted again, softer now, laughter forced, as if everyone had decided to pretend the storm had passed. But storms don't pass. They move on to new ground. I took one last breath of the metallic air, shoulders squared. The war I'd never wanted to fight, the one between respect earned and respect denied, had just ended with a salute instead of a shout. And for the first time in my life, the silence around me didn't feel like exile. It felt like command. The rest of the night unfolded like an after-action report written in slow motion. No one dared mention what had just happened, yet every movement in the tent was shaped by it. Servers passed trays of hors d'oeuvres with stiff smiles. Conversations resumed in fragments, awkward and brittle. The laughter was thinner now, like radio static after a transmission ends. Every so often, someone's eyes would flick toward me and then away, as if they'd been caught staring at a classified document. My father sat back down, but the performance was over. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers splayed, as though he were trying to hold himself steady on a surface that kept tilting. His friends avoided eye contact. My mother fussed with napkins that didn't need fixing. Chloe's face was tight, her wedding smile cracked at the edges. She glanced between us, wanting to restore order but too afraid to speak. I didn't gloat. I didn't even move. I simply stayed still, calm, centered, methodical. That's the discipline they drill into you from day one. Once the operation's complete, you hold position until the dust settles. After a while, I felt a shadow fall across my table. Captain Reed. I turned. Major General Peterson stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back, posture relaxed, but presence unmistakable. Sir? I said, standing automatically. He gave a small nod. At ease. His eyes scanned the room. You handled that with more restraint than most colonels I've met. Just standard operating procedure, sir, I replied quietly. He smiled faintly. I'd call it textbook leadership. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his tone softened. Sometimes respect doesn't arrive until it's been publicly tested. Tonight you passed your test. You didn't lose control. You let truth do the talking. I nodded. I didn't want a scene, sir. Just accuracy. Accuracy, he repeated, considering the word. That's exactly what this was. He extended his hand and I took it. His grip was firm, warm. If you ever transfer commands, let me know. We could use officers who remember what quiet authority looks like. Thank you, sir, I said. He gave a sharp nod and stepped away, his movements clean, precise, and final, the way only a seasoned commander leaves a battlefield once the objective is secured. When I turned back to my table, my father was gone. My mother sat alone, her shoulders drawn in, her eyes shining. She looked smaller, like she'd aged 10 years in an hour. He just needed some air, she said softly, not meeting my gaze. He's overwhelmed. I'm sure he is, I said, keeping my tone neutral. She tried to smile. You embarrassed him. I met her eyes. No, Mom. He embarrassed himself. I just refused to join the act this time. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked down at the floor and whispered, You always have to be right. No, I said quietly. I just can't pretend anymore. I excused myself before she could answer. Outside, the night was cooler, the air heavy with the scent of wet steel and smoke from distant fireworks. The furnaces loomed above, black silhouettes against the dim light. A few guests stood near the parking lot, whispering. The paramedics' van idled nearby. My father was sitting inside, pale but conscious, a blood pressure cuff on his arm. I watched from a distance as the medic spoke gently to him. The words, vasovagal episode, drifted faintly through the air. Not a heart attack. Not even serious. Just a body's way of admitting what the mind refuses. Shock. The medic helped him out of the van. He refused to look at me. My mother hovered beside him, eyes darting, as if trying to decide whether to scold me or thank me. I didn't give her the chance. I saluted the medic, murmured a quiet thank you, and turned toward the gravel path leading away from the venue. Halfway down, I heard the crunch of boots behind me. Captain. The general again. I stopped. He joined me, hands in pockets, gaze on the dark horizon. Family can be harder to lead than any unit, he said after a moment. Yes, sir, I answered. They don't follow orders. He smiled slightly. No, but they remember consequences. We stood in silence for a beat longer. Permission to speak freely, sir? I asked. Granted. I didn't come here for revenge, I said. I came to close a loop. You did, he said, and you did it with discipline. That's rarer than people think. He extended his hand again, a brief, silent gesture of solidarity. When he walked away, I realized what had just happened wasn't a rescue. It was recognition. By the time I returned to the tent, the music had resumed. People danced again, but not with the same careless rhythm. The laughter carried a new caution, an awareness that respect could walk into a room wearing plain clothes and still command silence. I passed my mother on the way out. She touched my arm, a feather-light grip. "Do you feel better now?" she whispered. I looked at her hand, then at her tired face. "No, Mom," I said softly, "but I finally feel seen." I stepped outside again. The steel towers groaned in the wind, echoing like old cannons cooling after battle. I took one long breath and started the quiet march toward my car. Behind me, the reception continued. But for once, the laughter wasn't at my expense. It was smaller, humbler, like a room learning a new language, the language of respect. The next morning, the world felt muted, like the air itself was trying to process what had happened. The sky over Pittsburgh was low and gray, the kind of overcast that made the steel in the old furnaces look bruised. I checked out of my hotel at dawn and drove without music, following a route I knew by heart but hadn't taken in years. Back to the house I grew up in. The garage door was open when I pulled up. My father was there, sitting on an old folding chair, elbows on his knees, a paper cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up as the engine shut off. No swagger, no smirk. Just a man whose world had been recalibrated overnight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched like a truce line between two long-fought sides. "Your mother's inside," he said finally, voice rough. "Didn't think you'd come by." "I didn't either," I said. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "Didn't sleep much. Kept hearing his voice, that general fella." I didn't answer. He glanced at me, then looked away again. "They all call you ma'am." I took a breath. "Yes, Dad, they do." He rubbed a hand over his face, the motion slow, deliberate. Guess I should have been paying more attention. For the first time, the words didn't come laced with sarcasm or pride. Just weariness, realization. "I didn't want to embarrass you," I said quietly. I just wanted the truth to stand on its own. He let out a sound, half sigh, half laugh. "You didn't embarrass me, Lauren. I did that fine by myself." The sentence hung there. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest he'd ever come. I looked around the garage at the tools hanging neatly on the wall, at the half-built workbench still waiting for its final screws. The smell of sawdust mixed with old oil. It was the smell of my childhood. "I used to think this place was a kingdom," I said. "Everything you built, every beam, every nail. I thought that's what strength looked like." He stared at his hands. "And now? Now I think strength is what holds when everything else cracks." He nodded once, slow, and then reached beside him. A small red toolbox sat on the concrete. He slid it toward me with the toe of his boot. "That was your grandfather's," he said. "You were always better with his stuff than I was." I crouched, brushed the dust off the lid, and opened it. Inside were his old wrenches, worn smooth from years of use. My throat tightened. "Dad?" He waved me off. "Don't make a big thing of it, just..." He stopped, searching for words. "Just figured you should have the tools, for whatever it is you build next." That line hit harder than any apology could have, because it meant he'd finally understood. I was building something too, just not with his materials. We stayed there for a long minute, the quiet heavy but not hostile. When I finally stood to leave, he said, "You know, your sister's gonna have to rethink what family dinners look like." "I think we all are," I replied. He smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but means effort. "Be safe out there, Captain." "Always," I said. As I walked to my car, I looked back once. He was still sitting there in the half-light of the garage, cup in hand, dwarfed by the framework of tools and timber around him. Not a king anymore, just a man, learning to live with the echo of his own pride. Weeks passed, then months. I returned to base, to the rhythm of early mornings and late nights, to the quiet satisfaction of systems that obeyed logic and protocol. The calls from home became infrequent, cautious. But the tone was different now, softened. My father didn't tell stories about my sister's business or his job anymore. He asked about mine. Once, a manila envelope arrived in my office mail. No return name, just his handwriting. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping from the Wall Street Journal. Army Logistics Corps implements new AI supply tracking to reduce losses. He'd underlined one line. Efficiency is built on respect. No note, no signature, just that. I smiled, folded it neatly, and tucked it inside my field journal. For once, the silence between us didn't sting. It felt earned. That summer, I was reassigned to Fort Belvoir to oversee a new logistics training program for incoming officers. Standing in front of a room of young recruits, I watched them the way Gunny Miller once watched me, searching for the ones who carried quiet strength instead of loud ambition. Logistics isn't glamorous, I told them. It's not medals or speeches. It's what keeps the mission breathing. It's the calm in chaos. One of the recruits raised his hand. Ma'am, how do you know if you're doing it right? I smiled. When nobody notices, that's the mark of good work. They nodded, scribbling notes, but one young woman in the back didn't write anything. She just looked at me with that same half smile I used to wear, the look of someone who knows what it feels like to be underestimated. After class, she stopped me in the hall. Ma'am, my dad says logistics is just paperwork. I told him he's wrong. I met her eyes. You were right to tell him that. Keep proving it. As she walked away, I caught my reflection in the window. Posture straight, uniform crisp, expression steady. The kind of image my father would have once mocked, then maybe now, understood. That's how I knew the war was over. Not with victory, but with recognition. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken, only seen. And this time, I didn't need anyone's salute to feel it. Sometimes, when I look back on that night, it doesn't feel like a confrontation at all. It feels like a transfer of command. Quiet, procedural, the way responsibility moves from one officer to another. The chain of command had simply realigned itself, not out of anger, but out of truth. People always think respect is earned through noise, through shouting, rank, dominance. But the older I get, the more I understand it's the opposite. Real authority lives in calm, in precision, in being so steady that chaos has nowhere to land. My father and I don't talk about that wedding anymore. We don't need to. The lesson is embedded in every small exchange that's followed. When he calls now, he starts with, "How's work, Captain?" Not as mockery, but acknowledgement. Sometimes I hear a smile when he says it. The kind that doesn't bruise. That's enough. I used to think poetic justice meant revenge. That moment when the people who humiliated you finally get humiliated themselves. But it's not that. Poetic justice is when the truth stops needing to raise its voice. When dignity, after being buried under laughter and ego, simply stands back up on its own. At Fort Belvoir, I've started ending my weekly briefings with something I never would have said years ago. I tell the recruits, quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't expire. Authority doesn't shout. It demonstrates. They always listen harder after that. Maybe because they can tell those words aren't theory. They're field-tested. Sometimes when the younger officers ask what moment I'm proudest of in my career, I don't tell them about Okinawa, or the convoy reroute under fire, or the commendation. I tell them about a wedding, about a man who saluted me in front of everyone who thought I didn't matter. Not because I outranked them in the field, but because I outranked the lie they'd been telling. That salute wasn't the victory. The silence that followed was, if you've ever been underestimated, you already know. You don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes all you have to do is stand your ground and let truth report for duty. Because in every chain of command, whether it's the military, a family, or the small hierarchies of everyday life, respect is the only rank that truly matters. Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth finally spoke louder than pride? Tell me about it in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it forward. New stories go live every day here on Echoes of Revenge, where protocol, respect, and quiet strength always find their way home.